Welcome to the Just AI podcast. I'm Paige Lord. I'm your host, and I'm super excited to have you here today for the January 13th, 2025 weekly update on what's happening in the world of AI, responsible AI, and AI policy. If you're listening to this or you're watching this on YouTube, there's a really good chance that you are a day one listener. And this is our inaugural episode. So we're kicking this off with a news update. And I thought that I would start by telling you a little bit about myself and then sharing a little bit about what you can expect from this podcast. For those of you who don't know me and don't know my work, I am a responsible AI expert and responsible AI practitioner. I've been in the world of technology for almost 15 years, and I have been in data and artificial intelligence for most of that time. I have also been in the world of responsible AI for over half of my career as well. I do currently work within the Microsoft ecosystem. So I worked for Microsoft for almost 10 years, and then I moved over to GitHub, and I currently work at GitHub as a product marketing manager for our AI and responsible AI products and features. But I also own my own company, which is called Just AI. It's a responsible AI consulting company. And I have been doing that for the better part of a year. And in addition to that, I've been creating content on TikTok and YouTube and Instagram and putting thought leadership out there since 2021, before people thought it was cool, definitely. And I have been doing that for quite some time. So I've been in the space for a while. And one of the things that I decided to do in 2023 was create a newsletter. And this was just shortly after ChatGPT came out. People were being a little bit overwhelmed by what the possibilities were and what was happening and the risks with AI. I decided to create a newsletter, and that newsletter is still going today. It's a boutique newsletter that I send out every single week, and it gives an update on what's been happening in the world of AI, responsible AI, and AI policy. And every summary of whatever the news event was includes a perspective on why it matters, so that people could get a responsible AI expert's perspective on why this matters for them and the types of things that they should be considering as they're critically evaluating these news events. The reason I got here in creating this podcast today, it's not because I had a ton of time on my hands and was just like, well, how am I going to fill this time? It's because I included an audio version in a couple of my newsletters and people really enjoyed it. So I decided, why not just dive into it a little bit further, and we'll just go ahead and get this podcast kicked off. So that's a little bit of the history. Now, if you're interested in subscribing to the newsletter, you certainly can. You can subscribe on Substack, Paige Lord Substack, or you can look for Just AI Substack, and you should be able to find my newsletter. So the podcast structure is going to be that every week when I publish the newsletter, I will also publish the podcast episode. So you can read the newsletter or you can listen to the podcast. And the podcast is going to be available on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, and on YouTube as well. So you can get access to it from all of those places. The podcast is not only going to review the stuff that I've put in the newsletter every week, but it's also going to have a little bit more, some additional materials for people who are listening in. Because of the flexibility and the nature of the podcast, we can do a little bit more with what's happening in terms of things that are going viral, things that need to be debunked, etc. Once a month in 2025, I'll be dropping an interview with somebody in the world of responsible AI. I have this really beautiful community of people in the responsible AI space, the AI policy space. So my goal is to be able to interview those folks and get some interviews out there so that you can learn from them as well. So without further ado, I think we should go ahead and dive into things. And I just wanted to start off with some breaking news and things that are happening in the world right now. One of the things that I can't get away from on social media is anything about Mark Zuckerberg or Meta. And so I just wanted to address a couple of things there. I'm not going to do a deep dive into their AI personas stuff, but the AI personas that they had on the internet, they've been on Meta platforms since 2023. But a recent interview with the VP of product for generative AI at Meta sparked people's kind of panic a little bit, because they realized that there were some AI accounts that were out on these platforms that were essentially experiments for Meta. And so Meta has been scrambling to take those accounts down. I'm not going to dive into all of the details. You can go watch the video on that on my YouTube and see why people are panicking about that, what Meta is doing about it, and what Meta's motivation might have been to actually create AI personas in the first place. I'll also talk a little bit about Meta reducing their DEI efforts. DEI, of course, stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion, and they're making a couple of changes. The first one is that they're ending their equity and inclusion programs, saying that they're focusing on, quote, how to apply fair and consistent practices that mitigate bias for all, no matter your background. And they say that they're sunsetting their supplier diversity efforts. And then they're also ending the diverse slate approach to hiring, which means that there's not a requirement to have a diverse set of candidates applying or interviewing for a position. At the end of the day, Meta decided that they think that they have some better ways that they want to approach this. With all of these things with Meta, I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying it's good. It'll be interesting to see what happens. Second up on the hot updates are it's the TikTok ban. The Supreme Court really is signaling that they're going to be siding with the United States on the TikTok ban, which means that come January 19th, TikTok would basically start to shut down. And it doesn't mean that the app would disappear from our phones. It means that essentially we won't get any updates anymore. You won't be able to download it anymore. So if you don't have TikTok on your phone when the ban goes into effect, that's it for you. You can't access it. And you won't be able to get updates. So even if the ban goes into effect and you have the TikTok app, you won't be able to get the updates that are needed. And I think that those, eventually like people will just stop using the app because it will stop functioning the way that it's supposed to be functioning. So I will say this, I have a big audience on TikTok. And if you are following me from TikTok, I will be moving over to YouTube. So if you are interested in following along, you can definitely subscribe and follow me there. The other thing I wanted to talk about, and this is a big one, is the LA wildfires. This is a huge bit of news, and you may be saying, why are we talking about the LA wildfires on an AI podcast? That is a great question. I'd love to answer that for you. Recently, I saw some social media posts of people saying that AI is responsible for the LA wildfires, and I felt like it needed to be addressed. Does AI consume a huge amount of energy? Yes. Do we use huge amounts of water to cool AI data centers? Yes. And does AI impact the climate? Yes. I am not saying that any of those things are untrue, okay? All of those things are true. However, saying that AI is directly responsible for the LA wildfires is a really dangerous narrative. And so if you are someone who has become captivated by that narrative, I just wanted to offer some counter information to that so that we can put our energy and our effort toward actually making change where we can. So other factors contributing to the LA wildfires include alleged arson, dry climate, Santa Ana winds, and drought, as well as reduction in funding for the LA Fire Department. I think that reduction was somewhere between $13 and $17 million that was not offered to the LA Fire Department. Those are some of the things that are impacting the LA wildfires. Now, I'm going to say this, and I want to make sure that you understand that this comes truly from my heart. If you are interested in AI's impact on climate, thank you. And thank you for being interested in AI's impact on climate. It is incredibly important. But the challenge of climate change is that it's already a really hot button issue. And it's hot button without making these wildly inaccurate claims. So if you want to participate in climate prevention efforts, I think that you definitely should. And I have listed a number of ways that you can help in the show notes. And I think that there are some great ways for people to add their efforts to that cause. But please stop saying that the LA wildfires were caused by AI. Very important. All right. Now let's dive into the news from the newsletter this week. These are our rapid fire headlines at the top of the newsletter. I'm not going to go into these, but I always like to include some articles at the top that people might be interested in that maybe aren't exactly responsible AI. Shadow AI, shining light on the growing security threat. That article is in there from FedTech. 2 misuses of popular AI tools spark the question, when do we blame the tools? That's from Fortune. And then how Congress dropped the ball on AI safety. That is an op-ed from The Hill. Definitely interesting articles. You should go take a look at those. You can find them in the newsletter. And now I want to dive into the responsible AI news of the week. Microsoft is taking legal action against a group of foreign cybercriminals accused of bypassing AI safety measures on its Azure OpenAI platform. This is a big deal. I wasn't able to read the entire claim, but I wanted to walk you through a couple pieces. The first one is just sort of the opening statement that plaintiff Microsoft Corp brings this action to protect itself, its customers, and the public from defendants DOEs 1 through 10. So they're not individuals whose names are listed, just DOEs 1 through 10. Malicious scheme to misuse Microsoft's systems and technology for improper and illegal purposes, including the unlawful generation of harmful images using Microsoft's Azure OpenAI service. Although the technology implicated by this action is complex, the fundamental allegations against the defendants are simple. Defendants used stolen customer credentials and custom-designed software to break into the computers running Microsoft's Azure OpenAI service. The defendants then used Microsoft computers and software for harmful purposes. This action arises under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, the Lanham Act, the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. So I wanted to make sure that I got all of those facts right. Basically, some people stole API keys, got access to Microsoft's Azure OpenAI service and the computers that runs it, and then were able to bypass all of the safety features for the AI and be able to use the AI to create harmful materials. And they have been able to trace this back to the individuals. This highlights something I think that's really important that I feel like we need to be just prepared for in the future, even if it's something that we're not, fully aware of all the time, that Microsoft is a massive company. I like to also note for the people that I work for GitHub, which is owned by Microsoft. So I'll just say that for transparency. But I think one of the things that we have to be talking about is that Microsoft has they have a huge digital crimes unit. They have a huge amount of energy and dollars that go into stopping people from doing things like stealing API keys and accessing their computers. So Microsoft puts a lot of dollars and energy into that. There are other AI systems out there who may have security in place, but they may not have the sophisticated watchdog efforts to be seeing who might be coming in and breaking into their computer systems. So this is just something for us to be aware of, that one of the biggest companies in the world who's putting a huge amount into making sure that their own computers remain safe are having to take these individuals to court in order to get some kind of relief from these cybercrimes. And so we're probably going to see more companies in the future that are dealing with cybercriminals who are breaking into their infrastructure and ultimately accessing things that they shouldn't access. The second responsible AI article of the week is that Meta is shifting their content monitoring strategy and they're moving away from their third-party fact-checking. Meta cited a couple of reasons for this. The first thing is that they said that this works against free speech. The second thing is that they said that the systems and processes they had to put in place for this were incredibly complex, and essentially they were failing at it. They were not able to fully and accurately identify when somebody was posting content that actually was violating their terms. And then they had to create all of these other systems on top of that to try to undo some of the failures of the system that was supposed to catch the content that violated their terms. So it ended up being something that was just really cumbersome for them. And I think with the change in the political tides in the United States, as well as the huge amount of dollars that are available for people to profit off of artificial intelligence, that the winds have just sort of shifted. And Meta has decided that this is an area where they're not going to put any more dollars. And so definitely a huge risk, I think, especially as we go, further into the world of artificial intelligence and people are using artificial intelligence to create materials and pump out misinformation, and this raises the risk. And I think that everybody needs to be just a lot more thoughtful about the content that they're consuming. First of all, whether or not they want to be on social media platforms in the first place. And second of all, how they're going to go about making sure for themselves that the content that they are taking in is content that is, it's not misinformation, it's not lies. At the end of the day, I think we're going to see a lot of what we saw with Twitter, which is, they changed their content moderation policies, and then all of a sudden there was a huge uptick in misogynistic commentary and racist commentary. So I think that we can probably expect to see something like that with Meta and their platforms. So definitely a huge risk, not just for everyday people engaging with everyday people, but also with AI in the future and how AI can scale these things out very rapidly. I think that's going to be a real challenge. The third thing I want to share in responsible AI news is actually a good one. So NASA has shared their 2024 AI use case inventory, and basically they're giving people a look into how they're using artificial intelligence as well as how they're adhering to the White House's responsible AI principles. I think that this provides some really detailed information on the use cases, and they're giving really clear information on how they're using AI, which is not just great from a transparency with the public perspective, but also people who want to learn about how AI is being used positively. What better place to learn from than NASA? One of the things that's kind of a big question mark is whether or not these responsible AI principles that were set forth by the AI executive order, whether or not those will actually remain into the Trump administration. The Trump administration has said a number of times that they plan on axing the AI executive order as soon as they get into office. And we wait to see if that is true. They feel like it has a limiting effect on our ability to be competitive when it comes to the global AI race. And I think that there are some kind of big questions about whether or not Donald Trump will actually follow through with some of the threats that he's made related to artificial intelligence and policy change. So in the world of AI policy, Here's a big one. The UK government has unveiled an ambitious AI opportunities action plan. This is backed by $14 billion from major tech firms, and it's meant to boost economic growth and create over 13,000 jobs in the UK. It's going to be deploying artificial intelligence in areas like healthcare and road maintenance, and they're aiming for $47 billion in annual economic benefits. So $14 billion going in to benefit the people of the UK, and they're expecting that this will have a $47 billion return on their investment every year. Well, there's definitely some people out there who are going to say that this isn't a great idea coming from the UK. Honestly, I like to tell people that everything is up for grabs in the world of AI, and it will be up for grabs in the next few years. AI is so relatively new that there is no roadmap, there is no game plan for how it should be done. And I think that that's something we have to think about. How AI is built, run, altered, secured, monitored, restricted, defined, all of those things are up for the taking. And the United Kingdom is focusing on being an AI leader. And I think that it stems from this really deep desire to see the technology benefit their people and their economy. So they're putting their money where their mouth is. They're hoping to create jobs. And I think by creating jobs, they would, in artificial intelligence, they would create sort of this like circular energy where the money's being put in, the people are being brought in to work on these things. They'll learn about AI in the process, and then that will have a circular energy to get the UK to become a more AI first place. I think that leading in AI can look like being the most influential. It can look like using AI most effectively where you're at. It can look like using AI to stimulate your economy. It can look like using AI to solve social ills or benefit citizens. So I think when countries like the United Kingdom say, we want to be the first in AI, I would ask that question, what does that mean to you? Because they could be measuring it by the number of companies they have that are creating artificial intelligence, or they could be measuring it by how effectively they've used AI to actually solve problems for their citizens. The second AI policy update is that the Biden administration's new AI chip export regulations aim to limit access for adversaries like China and Russia. This was in last week's newsletter as well, but it was just rumored that there were going to be more restrictions. And it actually came to fruition this week that there definitely are more restrictions that the Biden administration has put out. So now, NVIDIA and Microsoft are both saying that these measures are going to impact innovation and international relations, but these rules have been put in place for a reason, and the goal is to keep China and Russia from getting access to US-built technology that could help them to basically leapfrog the United States and become number one in artificial intelligence. So there's a lot of tension there, and there will continue to be a lot of tension between those three parties, the US, Russia, and China, as we continue to move forward in the AI race. And the third AI policy update is that despite all of these rules that are coming from the United States, China is actually continuing to make major progress and make a name for themselves in the world of AI. So there's a number of models that have come out, including the DeepSeek V3. And basically, there are reports right now that after the first set of regulations came down and said, you can't have access to the AI chips from NVIDIA or from other US companies, China was able to purchase those en masse and stockpile them, and they've been able to find those chips through other parties. And so the goal of the regulation that's coming from the Biden administration is kind of to plug up some of those holes to continue to hinder China's ability to be able to get access to those chips. But despite some of the challenges they've already had, they're actually creating some really interesting AI technology. The position of the US is that empowering China to advance artificial intelligence could allow them to be able to use AI for things like surveillance and military, which they would likely use against their sort of foreign adversaries, which would include the United States. And let us all remember when that giant spy balloon was floating across the United States and they had to shoot it down off the coast of North Carolina. And I think China essentially said that that was not them and it was not their spy balloon and it was an accident and it was a weather balloon and a project that went wrong. And ultimately the US government came out with a statement and said, no, it was definitely a spy apparatus. So I think that it's some of those fears that artificial intelligence might be used for those types of activities. So that's what's happening in the world of AI policy. Let's move on to the research corner. So I want to make sure that people have access to some of the latest interesting research that's happening in the world of AI and responsible AI and AI policy. So I have two research papers that I read this morning that I am excited to share with you guys. The first one is called Agentic Systems, A Guide to Transforming Industries with Vertical AI Agents. And you can find the link to this. You can search for it. It's publicly available, but you can also find the link to this in my newsletter at the very bottom. The reason that I think that this paper was so awesome is that it gives such a good building block style view into agents. So if you are looking to get into an understanding of agents and you want to understand how agents operate versus agentic systems and agentic architecture and what does that even mean, then this is an awesome paper for you. So I would definitely take a look at that and check this paper out. At the end of the day, it attempts to define a standardization of vertical AI agents, design patterns, and it proposes a cognitive skills module which incorporates domain-specific and purpose-built inference capabilities. I definitely recommend it for anybody who's trying to get the lay of the land in the world of AI agents and just try to get those building blocks in place. So I would take a look at that. All right, so the second paper I want to talk about is called Enhancing Workplace Productivity and Well-Being Using AI Agents. And this paper is about measuring the neurobiological data of a person, of a human, and then using AI agents in the workplace, which would presumably understand this neurobiological data. And then the AI agents in the workplace would change their engagement with the individual and the requests for tasks and things of that nature in order to optimize for what the individual needs and essentially continue to maintain productivity by altering these tasks based on what this person's neurobiological data says that they need. Now, I want to make sure that this is clear. This is all theory. This paper is all theory. And it's all synthetic data, and they do call in the paper for empirical data and empirical research to be done. So they have not actually tested this out in the real world. They have not used real humans and agentic systems for this paper. I thought that it was interesting. And basically it's like humans have different needs throughout the day. If we can get access to that information about how they're feeling and what they need and what their stressors are, then we can use AI agents to be able to change and optimize what we're asking them for in the tasks that they're doing so that they can be well in the workplace as well, so that they aren't dealing with all this stress and things of that nature. It's meant to be symbiotic. For me personally, from a responsible AI perspective, this is a no for me. And the reason that it's a no is because I think that it would be really hard to convince a bunch of employees to say, yes, you can have my neurobiological data. Yes, you can measure me regularly and get access to my health information so that I can be a more productive worker for you. I think that people would feel a little bit more like a rat on a wheel instead of a human in the workplace. And I think that that would be a real challenge. I think there's a privacy risk. I think there's a job security risk of people worrying that if they don't get their job done or if they're not performing the best or if the agent has to make 15 different moves in a day in order to accommodate them, that could cause some stress for people, who feel like they might be losing their job. So interesting paper to read, definitely really interesting to read, but it was a no for me. Anyway, there's a lot happening in the world of AI in January. I am anticipating a huge uptick in AI news and specifically AI policy news as Donald Trump heads back into the White House. So I'm going to be keeping an eye on that. Make sure that you are following on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify. If you like this podcast and you think it's interesting, please follow along. Please share it because that really helps us to get the word out about the work that we're doing here. And that way other people can be informed about what's happening. Make sure that you subscribe to the Just AI newsletter on Substack if that's something that interests you. And then you can also subscribe to Just AI with Paige on YouTube. I want to thank you so much for being here as a day one listener, and I really appreciate that we've been able to talk through some of the big updates of the week. I hope you guys have a good one. I'll see you next week.